everybody. This is Sarfaraz Kazi. I'm super excited to have you all here to attend the very first episode of Unplugged Bytes by Hive Pro. I couldn't be more happy to have our first speaker, Hugh Njemanze, a cybersecurity veteran, a leader, a mover and shaker of the industry, but a very intellectual person. The idea is today we want to get into his mind, see how he thinks perspective of a few things, some of his interests, which I'm sure you wouldn't know, and how he sees the world to be evolving. So thank you, Hugh, for being with us.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hugh, everybody knows you as the cybersecurity whiz, person who has redefined the cybersecurity market. But I know there is more to you than cybersecurity, and specifically your passion for Tesla and music. So how about us talking about Tesla, music, and cybersecurity today?
Sounds like fun. So maybe I'll start with music because that was one of my earliest passions. So I started pretty late, I guess, for most musicians because I was in my mid-teens, but I quickly became obsessed. I was playing guitar, so I learned pretty much all of my favorite records by ear and taught myself. But I found that I learned a lot more from being passionate about music than just the notes. Basically, I realized I didn't mind practicing for hours on end. I didn't mind repeating a passage until it sounded exactly the way I wanted it to sound. And so in a way, it was teaching me how to learn and also teaching me that you can actually develop a strong skill just by practicing. So in other words, it's probably possible to do most things if you put in the work. And a guy named Malcolm Gladwell wrote a very good book about that called Outliers, I think, which was about how if you spend 10,000 hours practicing with intent, that's how great things get achieved. Because to be a good programmer, you need to be willing to spend all night tracking down one bug and feel excited when you finally find that bug and fix it, as opposed to angry that you spent 8 hours. So in a way, I think that same DNA, if you will, that makes a musician practice also makes for a good software developer. And also part of it with software and with music is judging when you're not done. So if you think you're done when you're not done, then you'll have bugs in your code. But if you have a very strong sense of the difference between almost done and really done, then you can make good quality software, you can make good quality music. And then if we come to actual companies that I have found very inspirational, both Apple and Tesla would fit the bill for similar reasons. Maybe I'll talk about Tesla first because they are currently in the spotlight. And I bought my first Tesla in May of 2019. Before that, I was aware of them as a company. I admired their products, partly because of what they were trying to do, which is they had a very strong mission and vision. But when they went from sort of one expensive flagship product to a simpler, mass-produced car that was aimed at sort of popularizing their vehicles, I assumed, because this is how any other car company would do it, that the Model 3, which was the new cheap car, about half the price, actually at the time about a third of the price of their Model S, I assumed it would just be sort of a low rent budget car. So I went to do a test drive of the Model 3, which again, I had low expectations because it was the budget model. And I was completely blown away because as far as I could tell, the Model 3 was not only as good as their flagship, the Model S, but it was probably better because it was newer and had all their latest thinking. And so I think that goes back to, they have a culture that is actually a very powerful force for innovation, efficiency, and they apply it to more than just the end product. So basically, one of the products is a Tesla car. They've got pretty much 4 of those that they make today. But I think their real product is the Tesla factory and the Tesla culture and the way they do innovation, and everything else flows from that. But when you look at the information coming out, they make changes to their cars in 1 week that most companies make on either mid-cycle or full cycle refreshes. And a mid-cycle is like 2 to 3 years. A full cycle is 5 to 7 years. So changes that usually don't show up in a regular car for, you know, either a model year or 2 years or 5 years or 7 years are released in Teslas every week. There are about 28 changes to any one of the models every week. So if you think about that, that's more than 1,000 changes in 1 year. Okay, so so that's an idea of why I find Tesla amazing. They have a very flat hierarchy. In other words, even Elon himself works on the factory floor. So the greatness is not coming from a hierarchy of managers. It's coming from instilling a culture that every individual worker in the company is empowered to contribute to progress and innovation.
Let's talk about some of the innovation they're doing from a user experience perspective.
One of the very interesting things about Tesla to me is that they're able to pursue sort of optimizing more than one vector at a time. So one example that comes to mind is, it's clear when you look at the design of their cars that they are highly focused on simplicity. And simplicity surfaces in many ways. One is you can see that the cars look like they were designed in a wind tunnel. Obviously, that makes the car more efficient because the battery has to do less work fighting wind resistance. But at the same time, it makes the lines very simple and clean. If you look inside the car, they've removed almost everything you would expect to find in a normal car, or shall we call them legacy car. On the dashboard, you can see they've, especially on the Model 3 and Model Y, they've removed the whole instrument cluster that's in front of the driver behind the steering wheel. They've replaced all the knobs and buttons with one screen that looks like a big iPad in the middle of the car. So somebody who gets into that car for the first time, I think is very polarizing. So essentially, it's like they've thought of not only that they want to remove something, but what they're going to replace it with and how it's going to be better. And if you meet them halfway, meaning you try the new interface with an open mind, when you go back to the old way, you're like, oh, I just want to be back in my Tesla again.
Absolutely. I think so. Very important, you know, how we consume legacy technologies and why there's always a need to reinvent it and make life simpler as technology evolves. Speaking about technology, you know, one aspect of your life is cybersecurity. And so just
Yes.
kind of want to go there and want your perspective of where do you see the cybersecurity market is heading? Where do you see the disruptions happening? And you know, your thoughts.
Okay. Well, I'll keep this a little high level. And if you just zoom out a little bit, cybersecurity is like a contest between good guys and bad guys. So it seems like the bad guys have several advantages, not necessarily because if we are the good guys, can't have those advantages, but somehow it seems to be easier for the other side. I'll give you an example. So collaboration is a good thing, especially when you're defending against an enemy or a threat. So the bad guys seem to be able to share information, turn exploits into either something that is shared underground, or they can even set up commercial vehicles so that amongst each other they can buy exploits. Now, in the good guy world, a lot of the dynamic is that every company is a silo with patent attorneys and intellectual property. And so the notion of community sharing is very hampered by the infrastructure that's in place supposedly to protect our intellectual property. Obviously, there are fewer concerns about intellectual property protection on the other side. So that's just one example of how it's inherently more difficult for the good guys to win by collaboration. And so you end up with things like, well, we know about ransomware, for example, where somebody essentially compromises your machine and then offers to uncompromise it if you pay them money, right? So those kind of things have fairly simple solutions. For example, always have a working recent backup of your system. So you can tell them to go away when they come for the ransom, and then you re-image your systems and you're back to normal. But in real life, people rarely have that level of hygiene and discipline to always be safe when the ransomware attack happens. And so my point there is, for most compromises you can imagine, there are usually some sort of effective prescriptions, but not following them is very common and very easy. And similarly with patches. So you can say, you know, as soon as a patch comes out, you should apply it. But there are many old exploits that still get exploited because they've never been patched, right? So again, these are all things, I think, where there are known solutions. However, there's a human somewhere in the loop, and the human in a way is the vulnerability, right? Or somebody leaves a very nice looking USB flash drive on the ground in the parking lot, and somebody walks by and picks it up, not knowing it's designed to infiltrate their system as soon as they plug it into their USB port, right? So a lot of the exploits take advantage of human nature and can mainly be fixed through upgrading the humans. So that means either training or changing the systems so that it's very hard to exhibit the vulnerable behavior that the bad guy is looking for. On another side, we have lots of tools out there that collect lots of data, do a lot of monitoring. And so the challenge there is you can collect so much information that it becomes almost impossible to figure out which part of it is important and which part of it is noise. So to me these days, I see cybersecurity as becoming more and more of a big data analytics challenge. You know, I think the combination of producing tools that leverage the humans, make them more effective, and then also tools that automate the process of extracting useful information from big data collection. So if you focus on both the human side, I think, and the digital vast data side, those are two very good complementary angles from which to think about security advances and how to attack the problem.
You know, the barrier to entry, I guess, for organizations to consume cybersecurity is kind of increasing because of skill shortage. Do you think there is a need to for the market to reinvent, to be more user friendly or having a lot of analytics take actions and really present data, much like how it is happening in the car world, right? The gears are gone, self-driving car. How about self-defending cybersecurity?
I can give you an example from the music world where there used to be guitars and amplifiers, and the guitars had 2 knobs, maybe 3, and the amplifiers had maybe 6 knobs, and people could pretty much figure them out by trial and error and practicing. Same thing with cars. Used to be cars had very few parts under the hood, and you knew what the names were, alternator, carburetor, cylinders, spark plugs, and you could work on your own cars. And I think in cybersecurity, that was maybe true 20 or 30 years ago. And so what happened with music is there was a digital revolution, and companies are starting to produce amps that look exactly like the 1960s amps with the same knobs. But inside the amp is all the software that last year you needed a PhD in computer science to operate. Now they're back to the original knobs because they figure people don't want to learn all that stuff. They just want the old interface they had and the sound that they had, but without the weight. So the amplifier goes from maybe 80 pounds to 30 pounds because everything is digital now. So it's just the weight of the speaker and the wooden box. And the guitarist is quite happy because it looks just like the old amp from 40, 50 years ago. And so I think essentially we need to do the same in the security world. So we need the software to operate in terms of what the security guy wants to talk about. So if he wants to talk about actors on the threat stage and give them names like Fancy Bear, then he should be able to ask, what do we know about Fancy Bear? And have we seen any activity? As opposed to having 100 IP addresses and Googling them to see what they're up to, right? So essentially, we need to go backwards from the highest level of abstraction, which is how does the human want to think about it? And then hide everything else behind a very, very, what's the right word? A dashboard, if you will, that is speaking the security analyst's language. Don't make the security analyst learn a new language.
As we get towards the end of our interview, just wanted to get some unique insights in your mind, and this is where we're going to ask you some impromptu question, and we expect very short, immediate answers on them. Title of your autobiography:
Too many hobbies, too little time.
3 adjectives that best describe you.
Curious, lifelong student, and I like games. Me and my 3 sisters played lots of card games and board games when we were kids.
Your most useless talent.
Most useless talent. Well, one of them for sure is I can remember license plates because I just make up a mnemonic as soon as I see a license plate. Same thing with phone numbers. So phone number one sometimes comes in handy, but the license plate one hasn't come in handy since when I was a kid. Used to be, we all knew the license plate numbers of our friends' parents' cars. So when they came to pick them up from school, we would call out, John or whoever, your dad's here.
Best advice you ever received?
Well, one that sticks out is a CEO I worked with a long time ago told me it's not what happens to you, it's what you do with it. And I think the words he used were, it's not what happens to you, it's what you make of it. And I have since found that to be very profound. because what you make of it can be interpreted as how do you receive it, how do you understand it, but also as what do you do with it. So if something happens to you, it could seem good or bad in the moment, but really what you end up doing about it or with it, or how you let it make you feel, or whether you let it inspire you to do better, these are all choices, right? You don't have to choose to be upset about something, right? If it's something that you don't like, then you could choose that I'm not going to, if it was a game, I'm not going to lose this game the same way twice, right? I could still make more new mistakes, but there's no reason to make that one now that I'm sensitized to it or now that I'm aware of it. So, so I think that advice has been very profound for me. It's not what happens to you, it's what you make of it.
Favorite book?
Favorite book? There are many, but I mentioned Malcolm Gladwell earlier. So I think Outliers is a really excellent book because if you have children and you read the book and you get something out of it, then you still have time to maybe apply it to your kids and help them with their life. Because you could read the book and go, well, I'm too old to put 10,000 hours into anything, which I don't believe that, by the way. In fact, my philosophy, I think, about life is that in a year, you'll be a year older, no matter what you do. So if you want to learn guitar, instead of saying I'm too old to learn guitar, you should think next year I'll be a year older, whether I learn guitar or not. I don't have a choice about being a year older next year. And I could put my free time in that year to good use, and I'll be a 1 year more experienced guitarist than I am now. Or I'll be somebody who hasn't started playing, but I'll still be a year older. So when I ever hear somebody saying I'm too old to do something, I just think that's backwards, right? It's like, I'm gonna be a year older next year, no matter what my choices are. So why don't I use that time to do something that's valuable to me?
I kind of resonate, never too old to do a startup. And for the absolute last section, some interesting rapid fires. I say a word and you say a word that comes to your mind. ArcSight.
That was just a super exciting time in terms of the evolution of security.
Smartest person.
There's a lot of smart people out there. So Elon today, I would give a lot of credit, as I mentioned, not just for the products, but for the strategy behind them. One trait that I see is that the people I look up to as being very smart are focused on a sort of intellectual honesty that allows them to sort of filter out everything that does not move their pursuit forward. So maybe that can make them seem one-sided in some way or another. But I think at the end of the day, it allows them to transmit something very strong to entire companies. And so when you look at Tesla, obviously one bright person cannot achieve what Tesla is achieving without that bright person transmitting some kind of excitement and passion throughout the organization.
A place you don't want to be.
A place I don't want to be. That's actually a tough question for me because I find that wherever I am, there's still something to do. Like even if I'm in line in a grocery store and there's 20 people in front of me, then I could use that time to think about an algorithm that's puzzling me, right? So
Right.
it's kind of back to, it's not what happens to you, it's what you make of it, right? I used to imagine that if I could only have like a low entry-level job somewhere, then I wouldn't mind being a security guard in a warehouse, and I would bring a guitar with me and I could practice for 8 hours while I was guarding the warehouse, right? So I can't really imagine a situation where there wouldn't be some hope or possibility that you would evolve. So to me, it's like I'm always a student. So long as there's a way to learn, I'm going to be happy, no matter where I find myself.
Awesome. And thank you, Hugh. This has been super inspiring, motivating, and thought-provoking, to say the least. Yeah, and we loved having you here, and we look forward to having more pearls of wisdom, as they say, in future. Thank you.
Thanks again for the conversation. I enjoyed it too.